Everyone, welcome to the Worship Artistry podcast. My name is Jason Houtsma, and with me is
Christina Kislanka.
Nailed it. Well, hello, Christina. How are you?
Hello, I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing really great. I'm glad that you're back in the office. You were missed.
I replaced you.
I know you're sitting in my seat, and I've been banished to my son's room.
What happened, Jason? Tell us.
Well, I will just say that I sang next to somebody for a very long time on Sunday morning. I won't say where, but then they texted me. We're like, so turns out I have COVID, and which, you know, I wouldn't be too worried about it, except for the fact that my kids are supposed to stay at my parents' house next week while my wife and I go on our anniversary trip, and so I don't want to jeopardize that at all. So I want them to feel great about it, and I feel fine. I felt a little woozy for like half a day, which is what happened the last time I got it. So my body's Superman.
You're just being extra careful.
Yeah. Oh, out of an abundance of caution, I'm sleeping up in my son's room, which actually, you know, don't tell anybody this, but it's almost like a little vacation. Like it's when I'm done with the night.
Where you're home. It's like the best of both worlds. You're still home, but you don't have to be like around people, you know?
Yeah. You know, it's which people I love, but still, and it's funny. Asher came up this morning or last night, and he's like, "Dad, are you enjoying my room? Your time in my room?" And I was like, "Yes, I am actually. It's a very comfortable couch. Thank you." Good.
That's so sweet.
I've got my guitar up here, you know, working on some songs and just doing.
Yeah, you've been writing.
I'm also able to go to my studio as well, so.
That's awesome.
No problem. But I miss you. You were just gone. You were just at a worship conference. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily a conference, but it was a full day event called The Send. I was in Kansas City, which is a very random place to be. Sorry if you live in Kansas City or in the area, but it was my first time in the Midwest.
Which one? Were you in Kansas or Missouri?
I was in Missouri, I think.
I know, right? The same thing has happened to me. I've gone to Kansas City. I had no idea where I was. Somebody asked me which state, and I was like, was I not in Kansas?
I know for a fact I flew into Missouri, but it could have been in Kansas. Why do people do that? Why is that a thing? Why is there Kansas City in the middle of two states?
I don't know. I have no idea. It's odd.
Yeah, but it was a really good time. It was put on by YWAM and many other organizations that were working together to make the stadium event happen. That was it was a very long day, but a very full day. So it was nonstop from 10 to 10. So I definitely took some breaks and had to walk around the stadium and try to like rest and not be in the sun. But it was an amazing time.
Like I had to rest and not be in the send. And then I went back in the send and I sent it.
Sun.
Sun. I thought you said I thought you said the send. Like, I had to leave the send and then return to the send.
No, I couldn't actually leave. I had to be there the whole day. But it was really cool because just the week before you were with a YWAM kind of organization or you were with the YWAM organization. And then I, the following week, was with a very large group of YWAMers all together.
Yeah, very different experiences. I was with a group of like 15, but
and I was with a group of like 20,000.
Yeah. How is it like how is it being in a group that big? I feel like are you somebody who likes crowds and energy? Like, for example, like I love concerts. I hate the feeling of being pressed around by a bunch of people, and I get like I need my space. I would much prefer to just go hide in this room.
I would say that it is definitely different than being in like a crowded space at a concert, because it is so like the stadium is huge and it wasn't packed to the brim. So even though there were like not hundreds of thousands, but definitely thousands of people there, it didn't feel crowded. Like I didn't feel like I was like claustrophobic and like surrounded by people at all times. Like it felt airy. Well, it was outside too, but like it did feel spacious, so I didn't feel overwhelmed.
What stadium was it?
Arrowhead.
And you would think that would tell me what state you were in, but I'm still like, I just know the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yep, Kansas City. Who knows what state that's in?
Oh, the lovely city of Kansas City. Wonderful.
Uh,
Well, we actually have some folks on our podcast today that are a lot of fun. They are actually from all over. One is up in Canada, and one is Canadian, but is now in I think he said South Carolina. He said it was close to Georgia, so I think that's South Carolina.
Canadians.
Yes. Oh, well, it's so funny because he's like, I'm down here in South Carolina. Like he said it like with a Canadian accent. I was like, you don't sound like you're in South Carolina. But right before the call, I felt pretty good because I was able to name a few. We're up by Canada here. Bellingham is only 20 minutes away, and I also have taught students on the East Coast and stuff. So I was just really dropping all kinds of Canadian knowledge on those guys and just set the interview right off.
Laying down the facts.
just hey guys, we are buddies, we're close. I even learned to say his name properly. So it's Mike Tapper and it's Marc Jolicoeur.
Oh, a little French.
Yeah, Jolicoeur. And he made it like, because at first it's like is it Jolicoeur? And he's like, you can call me that. I'm like, no. You show me how. And then it's like he's like Angelina Jolie, which is funny because I'm like, wouldn't have called her Jolie. And then it's que. You have to like make your lips go out. Que. Jolicoeur.
Nice.
Well, so anyway, they did. Why do we have them on our podcast? Well, we actually, one is a professor, one's a worship leader, and they actually did a study on CCLI data over the last 25 years, and they were really curious about how worship songs get in the church. How they rise, where they come from, how long they stay. And I love the conversation because when they first reached out, I was like, okay, what are these guys going to be like? Are they going to roll in and kind of have this like, well, the old songs were better and now all the new songs, they're fast and we don't like them. And that is not the case at all. We actually had a really good conversation with them, just talking about kind of the implications of what this means. Like, what does this mean to the worship leader? Why is this important to know? How does it affect what we do? And they ask a lot of great questions. We had a really fun conversation, and I found it fascinating. So without further ado, Mike Tapper and Marc Jolicoeur.
How long, Jason?
Normally it's about a half hour, but we can go shorter or longer. Like really, it's just kind of just depends on how interesting
once
you guys
it's done
are.
being good.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. We'll see you in 10 minutes. Yeah.
Well, Mark and Mike, so happy to have you. Kind of a different podcast interview than we normally do. We don't speak with scholars, so it's kind of exciting to sit with you and talk about what you've studied. If you could quickly just kind of tell us a little. I don't know how quickly you can, but tell us about this study that you've put together.
Yeah, so this is actually a study that originated well back about 10 years or so ago. Mark and I have been friends for a long time. We served on a church staff together, and we were gifted 3 or so years ago with 25 years of CCLI data, top 100 CCLI data. And so we gathered together and we were like, what in the world are we going to do with this data? We pulled in somebody from the industry on the West Coast, a songwriter on the West Coast. We pulled in a couple data specialists, and once we gathered together, we decided that one of the things that would be pretty compelling for us to do is look at the song curves, the life curves of the CCLI songs over the last 25 years. We had some hunches about what we would find, but we tried to resist our urges with the hunches. And we just went after the data. So we ended up looking at how the songs over the last 25 years, how they rose, how they crested, and how they declined. We also spent a little bit of time looking at how the top songs were ascending, the top 40 songs. And then another thing that was interesting to us, we wanted to take a look at the gap between actual publication and the time that it took for them to actually enter into the churches. And so with that as our methodology, we went for it. And the data that we found, it was actually pretty intriguing. So we know that songs are rising a lot faster based on the data. 3 times faster than they were 25 years ago. They're declining 3 times faster. The most popular songs, the top 40 songs, they're arriving in our churches more prevalently, top 40. They're not like going up slowly. They're arriving real fast. And the publication date to actual entrance into the church, that's changed really, really drastically over the last 2 to 3 decades. Songs are arriving like 5 times faster than they are. And of course, there's implications to all this.
So what made you, so you got this data, but why was this the thing that you wanted to pursue? Was there something was that something that you were noticing and you're like, man, I'd really like to dive into this because I see that there's like, were you experiencing some of the implications of what was going on and then kind of wanting to research it? Was that part of the process, or what made you actually really go like, we need to find out, we need to understand this?
Well, I mean, this kind of, when you get this volume of data, refresh me if was it like 64,000 lines of data? Like, it was just like an incredible amount. So it's like a Rorschach experiment in some respects, right? You kind of sit down and you just let your eyes kind of go out of focus and what patterns are coming into play. So there was a little bit of that. And so as Mike mentioned earlier, you try not to come to a study like this with preconceptions, but you do have to have hypotheses in some respects. So we walked in with a hypothesis. Mike did a version of this, would have been a little bit, I don't know how many years ago, Mike, but one that was about lyrical analysis. And in that respect, his once he did the work, he actually ended up kind of coming to a different conclusion than the one that he walked in with. But this, I like to say, this is the kind of study that when you what we have found confirms what all of your congregants have been saying, which is that, man, it sure seems like there's a lot less time we're spending with these songs than we used to. And so, yeah, there wasn't necessarily an axe to grind whatsoever going into this, but once we saw this pattern, it was like, ooh, let's explore this a little bit more and see if we can actually see if this is actually being corroborated by the data.
So, oh man, there's so many questions I have just off of that. So what was your hypothesis?
The hypothesis was that songs, they just ain't what they used to be when it comes to lifespan in our churches. You know, I know that the audience we're talking to here are worship leaders and worship musicians. You're going to anecdotally just expect, man, than I used to, right? It feels like I'm playing these songs in more compressed time frames and less frequently than I used to, right? Like you start to feel this, and but you don't know, right? You can't. It's kind of like when you're growing, all of a sudden, you go to camp and you come back at the end of 2 months, and your parents are like, "Dadgum, you grew 6 inches," but like you wouldn't have seen that if you were seeing this person day in and day out. And so sometimes because we're in this kind of week in and week out movement of these songs, we don't know for sure whether this is actually something that's happening or whether it's just a perception that we have. And so a quote unquote scientific study where you really look at the numbers over decades, that's when you can actually see whether or not these trends are real.
Yeah. Did you guys, Mike, you had done some research on lyrics. I'm really curious about that because it was interesting kind of looking at your graphs and looking at the pictures or the songs that you guys kind of pointed out as like, okay, Refiner's Fire and like Every Move I Make are in there. And then, you go back to, I Love You, Lord is still in the CCLI top 100. Mm-hmm. Like it's just, it's crazy. Some of the ones that really do have that staying power. How did you study lyrics?
Yeah, well, I started in on the discussion, this whole lyric evaluation through PhD work that I worked on here, about 10 years or so ago. And my hunch is, and it always has been, it's even stronger today than it was back then. My hunch is that the worship leaders and pastors that are listening, that you are the theological gatekeepers of your church. There's some pushback to that when I say that, and I mean it somewhat as a provocative statement, but I do believe it even more strongly now than I did maybe even 10 years or so ago. the fact of the matter is that we remember songs. Songs stick with us more significantly than a lot of the other aspects of worship practicing that we're engaged in. We know that our attention span, Jason, is shorter than it's ever been. We know that our capacity to retain knowledge is shorter than it is. And we love to test this out a little bit, Mark and I, as we talk about this study. We encourage people to consider the topic of last Sunday's sermon. Maybe this isn't a great one in light of a proximity to
Pretty
Easter,
sure it's about the resurrection.
Yeah, that's it. It was resurrection. Any other Sunday, ask that question. And then we say, okay, now tell us, pick a verse, John 3:16, whatever, give us that verse. And people will scramble for that too. But then we'll ask them, fill in the blank, you call me out upon the whatever. And more often than not, we'll have people who will struggle with content related to sermons. They'll struggle with content related to Bible, but those songs, man, they stick, right? So what was the motivation? I'm as convinced as ever we've got some theological gatekeepers that are listening. I don't mean that as an indictment. I mean that as an encouragement, really, to your listeners. Songs matter. And that's really what compelled us in this study.
Well, I've always said it matches exactly what you're saying. It's like we're actually the ones that put words in people's mouths. Like you can tell somebody and they can listen, but we're the ones that go, now you say it. And how powerful that is, but also what an incredible responsibility it is. And the fact that we have to sit there and parse through. I mean, worship artistry, we take songs and we take the top songs. We have certain ones that are almost like passion projects for us that we're like, this one's under the radar and it shouldn't be because it's good and the lyrics are good and your church should be singing this song, but a lot of it is kind of reactionary, and we listen through all the lyrics and make sure that like, okay, we want to make sure there's nothing. I mean, I've been personally my own like church journey as I've been in everything from like Christian Reform to like Assemblies of God to like I've been in a lot of different worship environments, and I see how songs serve different movements differently. So I can see the value and I can go, oh, I can understand why this song is valuable. But I know for like my own church, the amount of things that I think about that go into if I'm going to lead a song, and the amount of songs that get disqualified over like one word over, what, that's not how we would say that. That's not what that doesn't fit our language. That doesn't fit our community. And so it made me think though about this whole idea of song staying power. And also I'm curious, you guys are seeing CCLI, right? Which is the worldwide church, that's the biggest, like, okay, what is the church doing? However, like, in a sense, I'm curious if you kind of start seeing pockets, and I don't know if you got to analyze this data, but pockets of, churches aren't all listening to the same radio station anymore. We're not all getting our Worship Leader magazine CD of these are the 10 songs that everybody's doing that come with the magazine, and everybody jumps on board with that and just goes, okay, we'll pick some of those songs. I mean, there's so many areas where we can get music, and so many, we might be the gatekeepers, but there's still so many curators, right, who are going, hey, check, you like this style, or you like this thing, or you like the way this sounds, Did you get to look at any of those pockets, or was it kind of just the whole overall, like, big picture, this is what's connecting with, like, the worldwide church in its, like, just widest sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in that, Jason. So the first kind of caveat is, yes, CCLI is global, and yet it is also not every church, right? So one of the first pushbacks that we got early on in this was, first of all, it obviously only represents, really, for the most part, Protestant churches, right? Like, that's a kind of a no-brainer, but nonetheless, we should acknowledge that that's not the entirety of the church. And then also, it kind of only represents, for the most part, urban churches. So there's not a whole lot of rural churches who seem to really be kind of buying into the copyright licensing resources seems to be what we're generally getting. And so that is a huge swath of churches. So we have to acknowledge the limitations of this, and just to know that this is just a bellwether to show kind of general currents. We do have access to regional data. We did not have access to the time that would be required to delve into the data geographically or regionally. So that's a great, if anybody's listening, like, I have a dissertation coming up, if only I knew what to do. Jason just gave you a great idea. We're willing to talk. So yes, this is really kind of broad stroke stuff, but man, you really hit the nail on the head, which is that, like, this is not simple. This is a really complex organism in terms of how people arrive at these songs, because yes, it looks as though these songs are rising and falling and hitting the charts higher and hotter. And yet also simultaneously, there's a tremendous divergence in how people are approaching songs, because like you said, like if I like song, if anybody's old enough to remember what it was like to go to a Christian bookstore in the 90s, early 2000s, when you walk in, you'd be like, I like Nirvana. And then there'd be like a poster that says, if you like Nirvana, you might also like, well, now the AI
printouts that my mom would give me. Oh,
Jason,
Pearl Jam, you should check out Third Day.
Oh, they're so close. They're almost
basically the same music.
Yeah. Well, now the AI is way ahead of us, and so it doesn't have to ask you. It knows you like Gyra by Maverick City, and so it can kind of like, it can present to you these kinds of songs through Spotify or through Apple Music, whatever you're listening to. And so you can get custom content, even though the world is it's both kind of becoming homogenous, breaking down into these kind of like smaller and smaller niche subcultures. And both things are kind of happening at the same time. And it's hard to tell what the end game is, I think.
Yeah, it's fascinating. One of the things I found the most interesting about what you guys found was how quickly songs made it to the top. Like, it used to be, like CCLI used to be the way that they collected data, and I think they still collect it the same way, but the way it would just take much longer. Like, you could go to praise charts and you could know what song is hot this week, right? Because it's like, that song just came out and now it's on this list and here's what's going on. And, Ryan Dahl's over there checking out his stuff and going, okay, another Canadian guy, he's sitting there going through and going like, okay, the data says this is what people are looking for. We have that. But even that things I always thought of like CCLI. I mean, like we said, I Love You, Lord is still in there. Like, I think Lord, I Lift Your Name on High was one of the longest running, songs, sitting at number 1 forever. We still get requests for that song, and so having that, like, how quickly those things rise in, do you get a sense of that there's a few movements that kind of get access to that kind of rocket fuel? That's, it's like if Hillsong comes out with a song, guess what? We're all learning that Hillsong song. If Elevation comes out with it, Maverick City has like launched into that conversation, but as like counterculture or whatever as they are, like, they're very quickly becoming the like, well, what did Maverick just come out with? It's always kind of what's the new thing? What is the big thing? And like I said, there's so many songs out there that you're just like, man, how is it this song isn't bigger, right? Because it doesn't necessarily have that fuel behind it. Did you get a sense of what was launching songs into that conversation?
Yeah, you spoke to a few songs. I'll tell our listeners here a few others. I could sing of Your Love Forever, classic 1994 song. It actually took 5 years, Jason, for it actually to reach the church, right? Give Us Clean Hands, published in 2000. It's not until April 2004 that it actually lands on a CCLI list. So enormous gap by comparison. Mark and I like to tell a story. I'm down here in South Carolina. I'm about 2 hours outside of Atlanta. And so we have students from the university that I'm at who are part of the Maverick City project down here. And just before Christmas, a few of them went down for their Christmas album. They, I think it was like late November, they gathered together for a Christmas album. I couldn't believe it was that late, maybe mid-November. And like 3 weeks later, the songs that they had sung were published and disseminated like crazy. We talk about the song "The Blessing," which emerged right at the onset of the pandemic. And Mark, you know this story probably better. You can tell it better than I can, but the speed at which this song actually reached like the global masses at a specific time is absolutely remarkable, like unseen here a few decades ago. I want you to stay tuned here, Jason. Mark and I, part 2 of the project that we're doing here right now is actually looking at who's distributing the songs that are hitting the charts the fastest. That's a project that we're working with a few industry leaders. And we're really, really interested. Just like this study, we have some hypotheses, but I think you're onto something when you suggest that some songs are just hitting fast. They're like lightning, and other songs, they might be great songs, but they just don't have nearly the traction that some of these other songs do.
Mike, we'd be remiss at community, because I know like the people who are listening to this right now, like they have thoughts. You have thoughts. Your voice needs to be heard. You should drop online, whether it's on their social here for Worship Artistry, or you can find us online. But it'd be better to engage on this post however you can, and let us know. Here's the $1 million question: why do you choose the songs that you do? Because that's really the question that we're trying to field for this next one. Like, what is it that leads somebody between two blind song choices? Why do we choose song A over song B? And one of the current hypotheses is that the presenting church, for lack of a better term, the spiritual authority, maybe another term, behind the song helps determine the lens through which you view that song, and therefore possibly even the hopes for which you have. Curious to know, why do you choose the songs that you do? You might say that it's about lyrics. Maybe it's about lyrics. You might say it's about genre or tempo. Maybe it's about that. But maybe it is in some respects about the faith community, or the heritage, or the name that song's attached to. I'd be curious to hear that.
Yeah, I do wonder, because, I know for myself, right, I choose songs that match my community. Like, I'm thinking about, what are we going through? I pray, what do we need? What do we need to sing? What's important? What are the conversations we're having? I go to a pretty small church. What are I know what's happening in a lot of people's lives, and so you're going like, man, what do they need to sing right now? They're going through this. What do they need to sing? And you're kind of thinking about it that way. But it is interesting too, because there's as much as the world has expanded in terms of music and what is available and how much access we all have to recording and everything else. There's also, I think there's a certain kind of a thought around like a worship sound. I always say, everyone on the podcast is so tired of hearing me say this, but it's like, worship is not a genre. It's not a genre. It's something that we do, and it can be in any genre, right? But I think we kind of get that sense of like, worship songs should be this, maybe it goes low to high, or it goes, like there's all those kind of like little things. Right. And I think there are places that have kind of dialed in that formula, and so we do kind of naturally, like, I'm a little contrarian, so I tend to go like, if it does that, then I'm definitely not going to do that.
I like that. I like that about you, Jason.
It's the high schooler in me. It's still just like, I'm going to be different. But it's thoughtful, But it is just kind of interesting how those songs, get to be chosen. But I think there's also kind of this idea, because it kind of goes across the board. These few, Elevation's going to be big, Hillsong's going to be big, Passion's going to be big. Like, these guys that are still all out there doing it. I think sometimes we can get in our head like, these guys aren't thinking of it. They just like this song. They're not thinking about the lyrics. They're not thinking about, and I don't think that's necessarily true.
No.
But but it is one of those, at least in the people that I know, everybody's really thoughtful about it, and so it's just kind of an interesting thing. I'm curious if you guys, so you had talked about lyrics a little bit. I'm curious, and I tried to like find it in your article a little bit, just lyrically, have you seen a change in the lyrics of songs over time? Did you look at that at all? Because I wondered if, are songs burning out quicker because they maybe don't have the same depth that an older song did? Or are songs, is it more our attention span? Do you have any theories behind all that?
Yeah, Mark,
hypothesis, right?
You can speak to this too. This is where I'd like to give some props where props are due. Clearly, songwriters are listening to constructive critiques, or have been over the last 10 years. You purposefully these days see songs, much more Trinitarian. So divine pronouns are hitting a lot more broadly than they probably did 10 years, not probably, than they are 10 years ago. We're seeing Old Testament themes, for example, that are hitting. We love to talk about dry bones and seas parting, which is another conversation. But so the breadth and depth of themes, I think, are actually pretty solid. So I like the trend actually that we're heading. Credit where credit is due. Songwriters are listening. It's interesting. There's sort of a history here with lyrical song analysis, and we're kind of at a tipping point, I think, Jason. On the inside, there's a lot of people that are like, would you just stop with the lyrical analysis? You've beat these, I know that there's a lot of I's in this song. I know that there's a lot of we's, just stop it. So I think we're kind of at a threshold here. My sense is, at least as the research goes with lyrical analysis, I don't know what lyrical analysis 2.0 looks like, but we've kind of reached probably a limit to that. And yeah, credit where credit is due. I think songwriters are actually hitting on a lot more broad topics, theological topics, and hitting on divine pronouns. They're listening and they're responding pretty well. Mark, would you agree with that maybe?
I think so. I mean, alluding to the previous work that you did, you kind of went into that with maybe a soft hypothesis. Again, what your congregants might tell you, the old hymns were better, right? This was the general, like they just don't write them like they used to. And then when you really kind of word cloud it and take a look at it like hard facts, you're like, no, I mean, there was a bunch of like really poorly written and incorrect hymns. It's just kind of the way that it was. There's a lot of classics, absolutely. And yet it's not as though older is better. It works for wine, but not necessarily for worship songs. There's a lot of really, really great content that's coming out now. I think, in fact, that's actually part of I'll use the word problem, maybe more the dilemma. I think that's what's leading to this turnover. I think we're in a high yield season of worship songs. And maybe there was a one point in time where it was like you alluded to, getting that disc in the mail where you'd have 10 songs or whatever, and you'd be like, man, like 3 or 4 of these are going to make my rotation, whatever. But now, even if we don't look at the indie, I'll use indie loosely, these smaller kind of release churches, if we just look at the mainstream kind of juggernauts that we've already mentioned and a few others beside, the sheer volume of output that they're giving us, we can't, like, if we try to implement them, we will literally be singing a new song every single Sunday, and that would make the psalmist happy, but it will not make your congregation happy. They won't have the ability to get these songs internalized at all. So I think we've actually, it's not for lack of quality. I think it's actually in terms of both like recording, in terms of melody, like, so these are often quite singable, great content lyrically, but there's just too dang much of them. And so I call it a displacement theory in some respects, right? Like if you have a cup full of water and then the waitress comes back with the jug, there's just not much you can do, right? Like, it's like, I need to pour this out. I'm like, if she does, and then it's going to go on your table, right? There's only so much that cup can handle. And I think our cup is starting to runneth over a little bit in terms of the output.
Well, do you think too, like, with the role of there being a worship pastor who is paying attention to all the things that are coming out and, sits with a song, I sit with, if I'm going to introduce a song, I sit with that song for a long time. By the time I introduce it, I'm tired of it almost, You kind of get to that point where you're like, all right, cool, okay, we'll sing this for a while, and then like like you were saying, like the psalmist just wants to like keep. I got another one. Check out my next song.
Yeah.
But if we are the ones that are putting words in people's mouths, if these are the things that people are going to remember, do you think it's somewhat detrimental to move on to music too quickly because we're never really internalizing it, in our souls, like in our, like having it become part of our language and that sort of thing? Or do you think it's kind of good to continue to bring a fresh voice to the same ideas? Like, can we think about God a little bit differently? Like God is infinite, but we only have so many words, but maybe this explanation of God or this analogy or picture gives me a different understanding of who God is than the song that I've been singing the last 6 months.
Yeah. I mean, I want to hear what you have to say about this, Mike. But I'm just like incredibly passionate about this. I think this is the takeaway, honestly. Like, if anybody hears this, and so you kind of hit it, Jason, is, if you're both a worship leader and somebody who is a pastor in any way. So if you're dealing with people, as you've already alluded, Jason, like you can see in your mind's eye people in your congregation, and those times when life has gotten to the point where they have to pull their car over the side of the highway because of the news that they just received or whatever. And that in those moments, they need to speak to God. And so they're going to pray. And we already talked about the fact that this CCLI data reflects a certain subset of churches. And every church is going to be different even within the subset. But anecdotally, a lot of the churches that I know of have stripped out the overwhelming majority of the response portions of their service, the time in the congregation when they themselves engage and speak back to God. They've taken out almost everything except for these songs, whether that's 3 songs, whether that's 11 songs, but it's these songs are the prayers of the people at this point in time. And so you are helping shape their prayer language, the kinds of words that are going to come not from here, but from here, not from the head, but from the stomach. When it's kind of like reflex prayer, these lyrics in some respects are going to be the ones that are going to come out. But if we haven't allowed those songs enough time to germinate and to move down, then I do wonder what will happen, what's going to come out during those moments. If they haven't been spending time, with the Psalms in the morning, if they haven't been, reciting the Lord's Prayer, if they haven't been spending kind of reflective time kind of on their own, which sadly, we know the majority of our congregants are not doing. So then we have this one tool that we've put almost all of our Easter eggs in this basket. And if we're sabotaging it a little bit by short-circuiting the amount of time that they're actually living with these songs. I hear what you're saying about the freshness of the material. Like, we don't want it to become stale, but nor do we want it to have not planted at all. And so this is the tension, and I'll use the word that Mike used earlier. It's not a reproach, it's an encouragement. It's a, hey, let's really consider this as we go forward with this. Mike, what were you going to say on that?
Couldn't have said it any better, Mark. Well done.
Well, it's interesting, even just as a worship musician, I'm so passionate about musicians actually getting music in their soul and in their hands, and like outside our whole website is all about teaching worship songs. But most musicians don't actually get to a place, church musicians especially, get to a place where they know the song so backwards and forwards that they're able to really engage in a way that they get to engage their heart and bring this gift to the congregation and say, like, okay, like, I know this song. Like, I can engage in what the congregation is doing because I don't need to think about what my next chord is and what my next note is. And I get to just be present, which as a worship leader, that's what gives us life. This is why we gather. Like, we don't gather to go and play and perform. We go to be with everybody. And the amount of time that people focus on, what I don't mess up that chord and make sure you get that riff, and I started the wrong key, or like all of that kind of stuff. You end up focusing on that and missing what's happening in your community, right? And so I think it extends even to the musicians. Like, if we give the musicians time to sit with a song and to It's great if they, we try and make it as efficient as possible, but there's no substitute for time. And so when you sit there and you spend time on something, it becomes a part of you. And I think you're right. I think that, like, for you to say that that's the takeaway, that it's like we need to give this stuff time to germinate it and time to be in our communities and be the language of our people is just really it's really important. It kind of shows you the implications of what's going on. Initially, I kind of looked at it and I was like, that's not surprising.
No.
But what does this mean? What does it mean? And I think you guys have really summed that up really well.
Good. Glad to hear that.
So what's next for you guys? What's coming on next? You've solved the problem. You've written a paper. It's good.
We're releasing 12 new worship songs actually as part of this, so you can download those now. They're available. No, Mike, you already alluded a little bit in terms of kind of the next part of the project that we're looking to.
We love doing collaborative work. That's really the drive. I'm using this all just as an excuse to work with some really, really great people and talk to some really, really great people like your listeners. So plan, or part B to the study, as I mentioned there earlier, is we're looking at the volume of songs that are coming in. So Mark used that analogy of the water pour. We're looking at how many songs are actually coming in, so the actual volume. And we're really, really interested right now to try to get behind some of the motivation of the people who are listening to this podcast. Like, what is actually motivating you as a listener to choose the songs that you actually are? So we're looking at volume, songs that are coming in. We're also really hoping to dial in on motivation of the people who are actually selecting the songs.
So how can people get involved in that? Are you guys running surveys? Is there site to go to? How do we get in?
Yes, excellent. So there definitely is going to be a survey. We're working right now with we've got a couple different people on the team. We've got Eli Dummer, who is used to be in another Canadian band called the City Harmonic, who's a great worship writer himself. We've got Adam Perez, who is somewhere currently between Duke and what's the school he's going to in Nashville again, Mike? Can you remember?
The Nashville school.
He's going to the Nashville school. Yeah. It's a great school. You're going to love the school. And then the other one is Shannon Baker, who is at this point in time, Dr. Shannon Baker from Baylor University. And so we're kind of working together, and we are just trying to fine tune how to do this, but it's 100%. There's going to be a survey that's part of it. And it's going to be asking kind of motivational questions. And so once that goes live, Jason, we would love to maybe pop in and it need not be an interview, but we can at least pop in and let people know kind of where they can access that. There'll be a website set up. We're also looking to do like kind of the online forums, like worship leader forums and whatnot, which are wonderful and scary places sometimes. But we'll definitely do our best to hop in and let people know that there's a ability for them to engage there.
Well, guys, I have to say I'm really grateful that you're doing this work. I think that it's so important for us to understand the why of what we do things. And life happens to us so quickly and so like week to week, and it can be so hard to like pick your head up and look around and go, okay, why are we doing this? What is the purpose of this? And we're doing it for our congregations. We're doing it for our people. We're trying to advance the kingdom of God, right? That is the why. But there's so many things that can just become a part of culture that aren't really part of Jesus, and about leadership and those things. And so I think it's awesome that you guys are doing this. I know this is going to fill my wife's bucket. She's a data analyst. She's always it's funny whenever my pastor's like, studies say this. She's like, yeah, I'd like to see that study.
Show me the numbers.
Yeah. I don't know. That doesn't sound right. I mean, what are we talking about?
Peer review.
Blind survey. Yeah. Was it double blind?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, what is I can't even remember all the words she uses, but I do listen to her.
Yeah, sure.
But I think it's really important that we have this information and that it's fact-based, that it's not just kind of like, oh, it just kind of feels this way. Like, I think it's really fascinating, Mike, that you were saying how, we thought that, the lyrics were going to be this way. And it turns out, actually, they're not. There is kind of a breadth of songs out there. And, it's easy to get kind of stuck in our own like perspective. And so getting to actually see data and somebody to interpret that data for us and show, I think I know how much work goes into that. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and so glad you reached out to share with us.
Thanks, Jason.
Wow, Jason, you were very chatty.
I normally try to, like, I know it's a good interview, or I feel like it's a good interview when I see the waveforms and I'm editing and I'm like, there's me talking in this small amount and then the guest is speaking a long time. And that's definitely not the full case in this one, but I just found what they were talking about so fascinating. And it was, I just enjoyed talking with them. And sometimes, when it comes to podcasts, you sometimes get a chance to talk with people that you normally wouldn't. And so like, I just like to take advantage of that. We actually hung up the phone and then we talked like another half hour. It was fantastic. We had such a good time, but really excited about kind of what they're doing as well, and kind of what they're doing moving forward. That question of why do we choose the songs we do? I just think that's a very fascinating question. And so as that information comes out, we will definitely be talking about, where our members can get involved if they want to answer the surveys and do all the stuff. I think their work is important. I think it's important to see what's going on in the church so that we can be knowledgeable and intentional about what we do. And it was a blast talking with them.
Awesome. Well, Jason, who do we have next time?
We actually have a really great follow-up conversation because, this conversation, one of the things we talked about was how quickly music rises and the names that we trust to play songs. And, for us, we see certain songs that we're like, man, this is such a good song. Why isn't this being done? At Worship Artistry, a lot of times we're more reactive because a lot of work goes into what we do. And so being able to see a song when we go like, hey, you know what? Like, we believe in this song. It's a beautiful song. Your church is missing out if they're not doing this song. We're going to do it, even if not many people are searching for it, because they should be searching for it. So maybe we can shine a light on it. And so we have Zach Boland from Citizens, who wrote the song Altogether Good, which is one of my favorite songs. We've been doing it in my church. It's incredible. And I was like, we have to do this song. We just have to do it. So we have him on, and we did something really different than we normally do. We actually did like a deep dive into the song. We went like line by line. He sang it. He ends up doing an acoustic performance of it. It sounds amazing. It's just a really different deal, and we're excited to bring that along. So next week or next time, I think we're going like every other week nowadays. Next time. Yes. Next time, Zach Boland will be on the podcast.
And if you want to learn that song, Altogether Good by Citizens, you can go to worshipartistry.com and get a free trial, or just log in if you're already a subscriber and learn it with your team. It's an amazing song. We really recommend that you check it out. You may not know it, you may not have heard it, but it's an amazing song to lead with your congregation. And while you're at it, check out over 500 other lessons that you and your worship team can learn and play and worship the Lord. Well, Jason, see you next time.
See you next time.